Patron.
Hey y'all.
uh Nostalgia episode today. So you'll only get this beginning part and then like the end part for video. And you're welcome.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. We'll keep it nice and simple. So
Exactly. Um but Justin's gonna do like a remix remaster of the
mhm.
OG episode, which it desperately needs. So that's good.
Yeah, that one had some interesting audio flaws in it.
It certainly did. Certainly did.
Yeah. So all
Uh
right.
that's my first time trying to edit three different people's audio at once and trying to like do some fancy shit with it, and it just did not work. It was a disaster, actually.
That's all right. It's gonna be updated, and you'll get a taste of it.
Facts. All right. Ready to this episode?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your gender affirming host, Abraham.
And I am your sexually educated host, Shane.
Beautiful. Well, then you
I
must not be
always
from
have
Florida.
nope. Actually, what's weird is I am. I just done it like as Matthew McConaughey says in his book. It's like outlaw logic, where it's like you kind of go against the grain and you do the things you need to.
Nice. I like that.
Didn't think I was going to quote Matthew McConaughey in this one, but here we are.
I was gonna say kicking off the episode with a quote from Matthew McConaughey is off to a good start, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's a real odd place we're in these days.
Hey, we are a psychology podcast, and one of the psychology things that we do is talk about sex and gender,
Mm-hmm.
or do sex and gender, I guess. And and so there's things to talk about inside of that. And actually, this is a rerun. It is a nostalgia episode. We are digging this one out to dust it off, take a look at it, see what we can glean, and we're gonna rerun this entire discussion, and then we'll also once the episode airs, or once we get through the original content, we'll do some updating on some other things that have happened inside of this discussion since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so going back and listening to the episode, there's a lot they cover a lot, and the guest on the show, Lauren, really knows her stuff. So that was really cool to hear her discussion and all that. So what we're hoping to do is get that information from the original episode, and then we'll like Abraham said, we'll have some cool updates, some additional things, some stuff that wasn't included in the original that we hope you'll enjoy.
If you are listening to this on the day that it releases, that is, today would be September 14th, which is National Cream Filled Donut Day.
Boston cream donuts rule.
Yeah, it is also National Eat a Hoagie Day. And although I'm not sure how we're going to navigate this in this podcast, it is National Quiet Day. So
there it
sure.
is. We just honored it.
Yeah, we just honored it with that 2 seconds of silence.
Yes.
A couple of things I feel like this entire month celebrates about 100 different things. So we shouted out some last episode, but September is also Sepsis Awareness Month and Friendship Month, and it is also National Honey Month.
Well, I
Interpret
like
that as you will. Yeah.
Yeah. I do like that there are multiple, like this day and age, there are multiple interpretations.
Yeah. And we'll just keep shouting out the rest of the month things in subsequent September releases. So be on the lookout for those, I suppose. And maybe you're already celebrating in your own private way, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think so. Are we doing this points to reiterate before we start? We're doing that afterward.
I think that we can do either way. Let's do it afterwards. Let's just do it all afterwards.
Cool. All right, sounds good. Beep. And I think that's all that I have. We'll talk about how you can support the show and join our little club of community people at the end of this. But without further stalling and honoring of silence, here is our nostalgic look at this episode. We need to do some ad break segues, huh? Fuck.
Yeah, we'll do this too.
I have to go through it and figure out where to put those. All right. This seems like a good time to take a break. We'll be right back. And we're back. You got one up your sleeve?
I do not off the top of my head. Okay. Beep. Hopefully the ads that are coming up are gender neutral and you get what you need out of them. So we'll be back after this. And we're back.
All right, just in case we do one more, I'll do one more. Well, hopefully that doesn't rub you the wrong way, and hopefully this won't rub you the wrong way. We're taking an ad break.
Nice.
Let's get back to the rubbing and talking about gender and sexuality. All
All
right.
right, we've got them.
Sweet. And get to our points here then, I guess.
Let's do it.
Okay. Beep. Okay, so that wraps it up for that discussion. Again, really cool, interesting. I really enjoyed it, and we did get some sort of pushback from a few listeners about us, not necessarily considering all the angles in here, and it sounded like there was some orientation there to feeling like one is made to feel bad because of their gender and sexuality, specifically those who are in a position of privilege. But so let's first reiterate a few points and then talk about some new information here.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, to reiterate what was talked about in the episode, gender, sex, and orientation are three very different things. Sex being the biological attributes with specific expressions or like physiological expressions. It's still not binary. So you've got male, female, intersex, et cetera, et cetera. But this is our biological kind of expressions of beep. But these are our biological expressions.
Right, of sex, yeah, and there's even more to unpack there.
Yes.
Then, yeah, gender therefore refers to the social construct based on how a person identifies and referring to the spectrum of what is considered maleness, femaleness, or something else, non-binary or other. And there's kind of an unlimited number of possible genders that might exist because they're going to be unique to times and cultures and history and places around the world.
Absolutely, and then orientation is going to refer to who one might be attracted to if they're attracted at all. And that's going to include gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important because a lot of the discussions around sexuality and gender tend to mix these up a little bit. So sex is the biological expression, gender is the social construct that the person identifies with, and orientation typically refers to who the person is attracted to, or the group of people the person is attracted to.
And finally, one of the best ways that you can really support the trans community is ensuring that we're using the preferred pronouns, treating them as human beings who are who they are, and accepting that they are who they said that they are. And that really considering that misgendering them intentionally or otherwise, but usually it's intentional. I think we're forgiving of accidental misgendering most of the time. But particularly when you're being a jerk about it, it really stigmatizes the person and can impact their self-worth and overall sense of well-being.
Yeah, and also to dead naming somebody who identifies as trans actually can bring up previous traumas that the person has experienced, and they are no longer that person. So it's just a really super awful thing to do. If you're not familiar with what dead naming is, essentially just means that once somebody transitions, they may have a new name and you're still calling them by their old name. So if my name is Shane and I transition to being Shayna and you still call me Shane, then that will be an example of dead naming.
Yep. And that has resulted in a lot of problematic things, including suicide for people in that community. So, and by the parents who refused, they were dead naming their child, and the person subsequently attempted suicide. So,
Yes.
I guess if you're pro dead children, then dead naming is probably something you like to do. But if you're not, then maybe treat people with compassion and respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, the final point to hit on from just recapping from the episode is that there is an increased rate of depression, anxiety, and risk of suicide associated with constant misgendering, as I mentioned. And again, it doesn't have to be from necessarily parents, but anybody who's being disrespectful to that community.
Right, and that's you can read some articles on that from Macklemore 2015 and 2018. So those are very recent studies that show how impactful misgendering can be with that.
Yeah, at least one of those definitely would have come out after the episode that we recorded. So, yeah, good to know those resources are out there.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive into some new information, some stuff that I think is really fun to kind of dive into. And it's not necessarily, I don't want to say it's new information or it wasn't included in the episode, but it's just some new stuff to talk about. So as of 2020, there is a second edition of the National Sexuality Education Standards. And this outlines several areas of sex education that include sexuality and gender as topics of discussion. Unless you're in Florida, then it's 0 topics.
Fact, yeah.
Yep.
They're doing the anti-education thing.
Yeah, they don't like book learning here. That's the thing that I've learned. So
Yeah.
but this actually includes those 7 topics, and we're going to go over what each of them is. And I think it's important to talk about what it covers, because it does kind of give you an idea of how the breadth of something like a sex education program. So the first is consent and healthy relationships. That talks about what yes and no means. That talks about assent within that, and it talks about healthy relationships and safe relationships specifically.
The next one is anatomy and physiology, or AP, which in this case does not stand for advanced placement.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Justin cut the parts of this of which I am very uncertain, and Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this refers to essentially just the discussion of the general parts of sexuality,
Yeah,
what the components are, what are related to.
just like literally body. It's all
Yeah,
body related.
yeah, it's your body. I mean, then that's what we were describing, is that sex is the biological attributes, and
Mm-hmm.
it also is on a spectrum, and there's a variety of presentations of that.
Yes, exactly. So did you want him to cut that?
Oh
Because
no,
you can.
just the parts where I sounded uncertain, just where I said
Okay,
like
all
I
right.
believe and I think and maybe and
Okay,
whatever I
I
said that
got you.
made it
Okay,
sound like I
I was
didn't know what I was
like,
talking
oh
about.
no. All right. Beep. So then there's also puberty and adolescent sexual development, or PD, and that really is going to encompass all the physiological and anatomical changes that go along with puberty, and specifically all the development that goes along within that.
Gender and identity expression. This is also important because this is a thing that's shifted over time, where uh, it, different gender expressions were viewed as being pathological in the past, and it
Mm-hmm.
is now understood that they are not only not pathological, but treating them as pathological creates mental health problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think has been something that's been more recently updated, and that this just covers what the different gender expressions and identities are.
Yeah, and gender affirming practices as well. And then there's also sexual orientation and identity. So that goes into kind of discussing attraction and what that means, and kind of navigating some of that information with the person.
Of course, an important part of sexual health. This just cannot be emphasized enough, because we are creatures who engage in sexual things.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, our species would stop existing. And
Yes.
doing so comes with certain risks. And there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of ways that all creatures engage in sexual behaviors. And so doing so as safely as possible is critical to a healthy, a thriving society, and treating it as if it is all taboo and inappropriate is absurd to the point of creating a lot of harm. So anyway, it's useful to have a healthy discussion about sexual health.
Yes, absolutely. And then finally, there's also there's interpersonal violence, and basically what that's teaching is how to stay safe in domestic abuse situations, how to maintain safety when you're in sexually compromised situations as well. So it talks a lot about that and kind of the interpersonal parts. That it piggybacks on the consent and healthy relationships piece, but it is more specific to domestic violence stuff.
Cool. All right. We this next part gets a little bit into kind of like news and politics, if you will, but that's relevant
Hmm.
because this
Yeah.
all of a sudden in the last year or so, gender identity and gender politics have been thrown both into the spotlight and then completely shredded to cabbage by
Yes.
our current the United States, at least current authority figures and those that be. So yeah, we basically decided that women in this country don't matter. So welcome to the United States, unless you're a woman
Yeah. It's really
or
unfortunate.
or
So
not white, I guess.
or not white. Yeah, yeah, just if you're not like a straight white dude, then good luck. So now at the time of this update, 93% of people in the US actually support sex education being taught in middle school, while 96 support education in high school. So there's a lot of people that agree that sex education should be taught in either middle school or high school. The majority of people really do, and those topics would include things like STIs, puberty, healthy relationships, birth control, sexual orientation. And all of these things are included in the national sex education standards.
Now, despite the support for this, there are many programs that teach abstinence only programs, which have been shown to be ineffective. They limit education on
Yes.
various aspects of sexuality and gender, and essentially forbid teachers from talking about it at all, which again is just
Yep.
anti-education. It's like
Right.
making you less intelligent as an outcome of going to your institution of insanity. So, for example, Florida's recent quote "Don't say gay" unquote bill that effectively passed that bans any lessons or discussion around sexual orientation or gender identity, despite the fact that gender identity, consent, and healthy relationships, etc., are both ubiquitous and extremely important topics and relevant
Yes.
to kids who are starting to experience an understanding of their sexuality. And I
Right.
also think, although we didn't talk about this really before, so I'm sort of ad-libbing here, but I think it is an important fact here is that there are children who are sexually abused, and that they then are introduced to this world very early.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are not given some kind of education about that, that can be very confusing
Mm-hmm.
until they get older, and they're not really sure how to respond or react, or sometimes they don't even understand that they were victims
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. And so I think having this education relatively early on to help people understand like what could be happening out there is useful. And maybe I think it's gonna make sense at various levels based on where people are at, but
Mm-hmm.
just something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the misinterpretation is that people think that sex education is a full-on sex ed program at kindergarten, and that's just not what it is. It's basic anatomy, it's safety, it's consent and assent, it's healthy relationships. That's a lot of what that education would encompass. But for some reason, everybody thinks that I'm going to go in and hand a bunch of condoms to kindergartners and go, "Good luck!" Like, and that's just not what it is. That's just not what any sex education program. A comprehensive sex education program includes those 7 things because, like you said, there are kids that are sexually abused, but there's also kids that grow up in families that are incredibly welcoming and open and they have gay parents, and they can't talk about their parents in a kindergarten class because it goes against these types of bills. So that's why this is
Yeah,
incredibly harmful. It's not
right.
that people are trying to groom kids. It's that they're trying to give them relevant age appropriate information to keep them safe going forward.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's no evidence that is function as grooming in any situation either.
No, there's
Um,
there's more evidence in the Catholic Church. Just I'm just saying.
Yeah, and actually, I think you could specifically point to keeping them ignorant is actually a way of grooming.
Yeah.
You're keeping them naive to the situations that they might be facing. So I would argue that if you are pushing anti-education practices that do not talk about this, that you are actually setting up children to be more likely to be victims of sexual assault.
100%. And there's studies that show that in the developmental disabilities realm quite a bit too, unfortunately. I want to
Right.
say it's something between 40 and 80% of learners with disabilities are likely to be abused in that regard.
That is a
Because
horrifying number. That is really gross.
yeah, yeah, it's really gross because there's no education programs that exist for, or at least comprehensive ones, and people say, oh, we're not going to teach it. So
Right.
but another as a glaring example of the need for education in this area is the discussion around abortion and understanding what abortion actually is. And I'm going to go ahead and just refer to the abortion episode so you all can do
Right.
that. A lot of people really misunderstand what it is, and many Americans actually lack a fundamental understanding of what sexuality means across the entire spectrum. And if you're not convinced, here are some quotes from real adults.
Uh, beep. So the first one is quote, on Saturday, my boyfriend and I slept together, but since we had no protection, I asked him to keep his boxers on, and ejaculation did not occur. I'm currently on my menstrual cycle. Is there any chance
Chance,
that,
sorry.
in other words, beep, is there any chance that I might get pregnant? Should I take emergency contraceptives? End quote.
It gets better.
Okay.
Here's another quote. Quote, you know a woman needs to have an orgasm in order to have babies, right? My favorite thing is the response to that was like, honey, let me tell you, if that were true.
1/10 the current population.
Yes, yes.
All right. The next quote. Homosexual females can't physiologically have sex with each other, though. End quote.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and my favorite one is, quote, if you get horny, milk comes, end quote. And that's in reference to lactation.
Just so we're clear, all of these statements are 100% wrong.
Yes,
The
yeah,
wrongiest
100%.
wrong.
So they could not be more wrong, but it is important to know that this is the kind of stuff that people believe. People do believe
Right.
this. Like, I've had
Yes.
to explain to grown adults what a fallopian tube was and how a period works. So
Yeah.
the fact that this is just something that just is it's so glaringly gone from
Yeah.
United States education that it's
Yeah.
becoming a more serious problem.
Now, another thing that I want to address real quick and just talking about this, because there's sort of two things to bring up in reference to this episode and other feedback, as well as something currently in the news. One is there was recently a discussion. The Senate confirmation hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, where they got all up in arms about asking her to define what a woman is, not necessarily offering one themselves. Although one very foolish congressperson or senator who I'm not going to name because they don't deserve any more attention, got up and said a woman is someone with XX chromosomes and no thingy between their legs, I believe is the way that it was phrased.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
incredible levels of stupidity there. But one thing to unpack in that is you might ask, well, why is that stupid? Why is that wrong? Well, first of all, you can actually have XX chromosomes and have a thingy between your legs just as a biological variation. That happens to some people.
Mm-hmm.
You can have XY chromosomes and not have a thingy between your legs. So there's that. You can have several chromosomal variations that are not neither XX or XY, and either not or have a thingy between your legs, and that will look different. The thingy that's there may not function, so whether or not it's present doesn't seem like that's always the most relevant factor.
Yeah.
If it, for example, they can be formed in a particular way that makes it difficult to function sexually, or makes it difficult to reproduce, or makes it difficult to do whatever. Like there's various complications that arise
Right.
during development that many people experience, and it certainly should not be shamed for that, and certainly not told that they don't have a sexual or gender identity because they were born differently. Is
Right.
absolutely absurd. And I think there's many other problems with that argument. But primarily, this was an anti-trans, and therefore, by proxy, or I guess reciprocally, what that means is this was a transphobic tirade by someone who is extremely poorly educated and very uninformed.
Yep. Absolutely. 100%. So I appreciate that side note. That was
Thanks.
So one thing I like to do too is I like to dispel some myths. And so this is where going to be some of the behavioral notes are going to come in. And so the thing is that when people talk about sex and sexuality, a lot of times folks assume that sexualized behavior in general is about the orgasm, about getting off, about feeling good. But that's not always the case. So an example of an assessment that was done in 2004, Fife et al. Had actually found that a 9-year-old boy's inappropriate sexual behavior, they were groping nurses and like direct care staff. It was actually reinforced by attention from others and had no sexual gratification component. And there's other
Oh.
studies that show like, public masturbation is not about getting off, but it's about getting out of the classroom and stuff like that. So there's a lot of examples of how people misinterpret sexualized behavior as being about an orgasm or about feeling good. And there's actually plenty of other examples of where that's just not the case.
In 1999, Milton Berger and colleagues focused on safety, specifically with respect to preventing sexual abuse among learners and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, successfully with their intervention. And this tackled the interpersonal violence aspects of sex education standards to help
Mhm.
prevent that from those people from being further victimized.
Yeah,
So
it was actually a really successful study.
which is fantastic. We need a lot of that going on, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And another note too is fetishes actually might be a result of pairing that naturally occurs when rewards are paired with cues in the environment at a very high strength. So it's not always about an orgasm because not every fetish is about an orgasm, right? So different types of sensations and different types of preferences get shaped up through pairing and kind of reintroducing those rewards with those cues, whatever those rewards may be. So a lot of times people think fetishes are just about getting off, and again, it's not that simple. It's
Yeah.
actually a much more nuanced, much more complex conversation.
Real basic. I mean, you go back to associative learning is basically what we're talking about here is
Yeah.
associating one thing with another, not necessarily intentionally. Like it's essentially when we talk about associative learning, we're talking about things that are associated for you, and then you learn that association as an outcome of them being paired together.
Hmm.
That's why we call it pairing. But yeah. So, and then one more I'd say is like we just had a little bit of pushback on this originally around talking about the privilege of men, in particular white cisgender men. But I think without taking another whole episode to dive in that, the data are just very clear on this. So a lot of people point to the fact that the pay gap in women might be attributable to the fact that they leave the workforce to take care of children. Well, I think one thing to consider is that if we had laws that were more equitable around parenting practices, then they wouldn't necessarily be obligated. And also, even when they control for that, you still have gaps in
Right.
the wages. And the gaps are also, but it's not just wages. Like you also see that in promotional opportunities. You see it in where there people have been where attention has been given to people who even make it into different fields. Is that like even when people of color and women make it into STEM fields, they don't get cited for the work that they do. And so it sort of shows that the attention is given to people who are look like the people they expect to find in those fields, and is less therefore friendly, or appears less friendly to people of those other domains, including women. And I think there's just it I always want to be careful that we're not ignoring a problem because it makes us uncomfortable, and it feels like
Mhm.
that's a lot of what happens when people refuse to acknowledge the discrepancies and disparities that exist among people of color, women, and like until we get to definitively prove unequivocally and without having to like manipulate and massage the data until it shows us what we want, until we can prove that is no more disparity, I think we should work towards equity. And
Yeah.
equity, I think, can mean in a lot of cases that we need to actively work to pull up people who have been held down by the system, because that gives them the best access to a relatively level playing field. So that'd be how
Yep.
I'd finish that up.
I think honestly, I've got no other point to make than that. I think that's, I 100% agree with that. I mean, ultimately, the conversation around privilege is always one of those things that it gets people all fired up. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that your life wasn't hard. It just means that
Yeah.
it wasn't made harder by how you were
Yeah.
born. That's all
Exactly
it
right.
is.
Yeah.
So
It
so
could have been
so
worse.
grow up, stop being a snowflake about it. Like, I mean, that's just me getting like, that's what me get. I get really worked up about that because it's like, if nobody's saying that your life wasn't hard, like
Yeah.
nobody is making that argument, but your life
Good
wasn't
point.
harder because of other things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It could. Yeah. You're exactly right. I think that's mic drop. We did it.
Yeah, there you go, done.
All right. Well, so I think that kind of actually hits our take home points, for me at least. I mean, do you have more take home points to hit on there?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, perfect. Well, gender and sexuality are a thing. Let's talk about our recommendations.
Recommendations.
You should definitely go first because I did pull out the last one. Now I did a new one. I forgot.
So my recommendation this week is a book called Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. And so this is one of those things. I'm not somebody who's like totally enamored by celebrity. I just find certain celebrities interesting, and I just want to kind of
Sure.
know their story because they stand
Yeah.
out. Matthew McConaughey being one of those people. And apparently his book, I'd always heard that it was really good. So I picked it up. And what it is he basically grabbed all of his journal writing, all of his poetry, all of his things, and brought them in boxes out into the middle of the desert and spent a year by himself writing this book and basically
Whoa.
collecting these stories. And it's like basically a storytelling, kind of like his journey. It's like an autobiography, but it's a really interesting kind of like life lessons, and talks about how he grew up and how he got these acting gigs, and basically how he's made so much opportunity for himself, that he's like really tried to like just kind of say yes to things, but it's
Okay.
also like interspersed, like it's designed really well. The book is designed really well. It's interspersed with like writings of his, like handwritten letters and poetry and stuff like that. So it's a really cool read. It's not something that I think that you could expect it from somebody like Matthew McConaughey, but I
Sure.
still think that it's kind of got an unexpected feel to it. It's really, really insightful.
Cool. That's awesome. I appreciate the
Yeah,
recommendation.
I really
Um,
enjoyed it.
yeah, that's coming across for me.
Yeah.
I get it. All right, hold on. Oh, so I was grabbing a link for apparently just greenlights.com is the link. So um damn it, I closed my notes.
Oh no.
Oh, okay, I got it back. Sweet. Okay. Um you need this Axby part at the end of your
Oh no, that's how I spell his name, because I don't know how to spell it because it's all
oh,
weird.
got it. Okay. Um um Beep. Okay, I'm recommending a movie with a small caveat. So this is Lost City, is the
Mhm.
movie. This is Channing Tatum, Sandra Bullock, and Daniel Radcliffe. It did came out a while ago, but I just saw it recently because it's on one of the streaming platforms now. And so caveat to this. I don't think this movie is breaking a lot of new ground. It's not telling a super original story. It's not like
Sure.
it's, you know what it kind of do is just like, here's a type of story that we've been told. Here's a modern, another more modern version update on this. But it's like, it's really fun. Like it's really funny. I think the characters are
Hmm.
charismatic. I think it's a fun story. Daniel Radcliffe really shines in this, in his character. But yeah, Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock bring a lot of really witty, humorous things. There's actually a short bit in here with Brad Pitt, who is very good, and so the whole movie I think really works as just a fun comedy adventure sort of romance thing thrown in there, and I've enjoyed it, so I'm recommending it.
Cool.
If you're in for like a sort of turn my brain off and just enjoy the ride sort of movie, this is the one.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, it's on my list. I'm gonna add it.
Perfect. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up now. We've been at this for a while. This is already sort of we packed an episode with more stuff. So, but
Yeah.
as we go, we want to say if you would like to reach out to us and talk to us more about this episode, you can reach us at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com. Reach out to us on the social media platforms. If you'd like to support us, you can leave us a rating and review or tell a friend, buy some merch, or join us on Patreon. The people who have already joined us on Patreon includes, but is not limited to, Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kim, Kelly, Kostya, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Thank you all so much for all your wonderful contributions and generosity. You are the
Hmm.
best.
Hmm.
Of
So
course.
good.
Of course, I could not do this without my team. So thank you to Selena, Kyle, Alan, Jess, Patrick, and Justin. And of course, Shane, you helped put together the additional notes for this. So thank you for recording with me today
Of
and for
course.
putting together the notes. And of course, thank you to our original guest, Lauren, for recording the episode
Yes,
with us.
she's so nice.
Very much so. Is there anything that I missed, Shane, or anything we should leave before we sign off?
I got nothing else.
Perfect. Well, then, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
Perfect.
All right, we got it done.
Okay.
I'm gonna upload these now.
So we
All
I don't
right,
know if
here
we
we
have a
go.
mini or time for a mini, but I'm
I do
gonna.
not have time for a mini today.
Okay, deal. That's fine. I'm going to stop this recording for Patreon. Bye, Patreon people, and thank you
Bye,
for.
patrons.